It's been really an interesting journey to figure out where I sort of fit into the publishing industry, and it's really exciting and great, and also really daunting. The market is very saturated. There are a lot of writers out there, so I feel like I need to be on my A game all the time. Um, it was really humbling. I mean, I think it got more and less than what the expectation was. So, on the one hand, it got some really great reviews and it got some really great attention, and then on the other hand, it didn't fly onto the New York Times bestseller list or anything like that. So, it's been, like I said, it's a super interesting um, to continually come back to it really being about the work. It always comes back to being about the writing and about what that process is and me and the computer. And then everything else has to fall away, because I feel like I just had to go through a year of sort of feeling my way through what it's like to be on social media and talking about your own books, being in interviews, seeing good reviews, seeing some bad reviews, and having to kind of come back to like, it's really not about all that stuff. Like, it's very cool when people are positively affected by something I've written, especially kids. When I get these letters from teenagers, I am like, oh my gosh, because I had a friend, Matt De La Pena, who's now won the Newbery, and since we were close, was has his whole thing has gotten really huge. But he one time wrote to me and said, "There's someday going to be a girl in Idaho who's going to read your book, and you're going to affect her life." And so that was always something I kept in my head when I was writing, was this girl somewhere, in the middle of the country. And I've gotten letters from people there, and then it's like this dream come true kind of feeling. It's funny because I've read a lot of books about writing, and people have different ideas about whether you should write with an audience in mind or whether you should just write for yourself. And I find that for me, to keep in mind the children and the teenagers that I come into contact with when I go into schools, that for me is like steers me, like, how much swearing do I want to have in a book, how much sex do I want to have in a book. Those are things, because I'm writing for teenagers, that I really try to keep in mind. And I also try to keep in mind being honest, because they aren't, like, what they're living on a daily basis is the real world. It's not some fantasy that we've put together. So I try to, it's a tightrope walk, but I try to address some real things while also being mindful of the fact that they are teenagers, and I'm not, it's not HBO. Like, I do need to have some kind of filter there. So. Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because this really incredible writer, Kathleen Glasgow, wrote a book called Girl in Pieces, and it's very graphic. There's some pretty graphic sex in it. There's cutting. There's some things that, I know my daughter is grappling with or has come into contact with, that I'm not sure. I had this moment of like, do I give her this book? Because on the one hand, I know that she would appreciate it because it's really like gritty. And on the other hand, like, what are we introducing our kids to? And I have tremendous respect for that book, but I did sort of have to make that kind of call, and I did eventually give it to her, because in the end, I don't really believe in censorship. And I think that if kids are looking for something, they're going to find it anyway. When it comes to my own stories, I haven't yet felt the need for there to be like all the way sex, or for there to be a tremendous amount of swearing, because for me that's not the main part of what my characters are going through. I think if it were, like, if it was a story about sex, like Judy Blume's Forever, or there are some books that are specifically about teenagers having sex, or if my main character was in like a relationship, or, if that was a big part of what was going on in the story, then I would do it. But so far, it's not, it hasn't come to a place where I even have to make that decision. Well, I think I'm part of a, lucky wave that came, and, post Twilight. Like, I think between Harry Potter and Twilight and some of those, the Hunger Games, those books really like paved the way for there to be a big market for authors like me who want to write about teenage experiences. And so far I have been in kind of, my first book was contemporary realistic. The second one is more magical realism. And so I'm definitely not a fantasy writer, but I think I've been really lucky to sort of get my foot in the door at a time where the door was pretty open for that. Because I imagine if you were trying to write books for teenagers 30 years ago, there would have only been a handful of people. I mean, when I was reading, I went straight from like Chronicles of Narnia to Stephen King. There really wasn't very much in the middle. So there aren't very many. There's a pretty wide range, of things. Like I have a friend, Jessica Brody. She writes books for Disney. They're gonna, books about like wish fulfillment. Like you wish you were 15, you wake up and you're 15, or whatever the thing is. Those are, and so there's that all the way to what I was kind of talking about with Kathleen Glasgow and Girl in Pieces, where it goes from almost no edge but a lot of fun to super, super edgy. And I think what really determines what story you should be writing is when you are thinking, if you're a writer, what is the age of the protagonist? It didn't used to be classified that way, but for instance, Catcher in the Rye today would be a young adult book. So how old is your main character? Unless it's a memoir where you're talking about, really, really edgy, gritty stuff, you probably are going to be classified as young adult if you've got a teenage protagonist. So that's what I sort of think about. Like people ask me all the time, will you someday write for adults, as though that would be graduating to real writing? But for me, it's like, what is the age of when I think of stories, what is the age of the person whose story it is? And then I build around the character. I think that the way this one is being marketed is, sort of like 14 to 30. Because I do think I have an adult audience. And it's funny, for this Raging Light, I have gotten a fair amount of letters from adults who had either experiences where their, parents abandoned them, or there was something in there that they could relate to. And so yeah, I mean, I think it can be all the way up. I know people my age who read it, so. So the book, the newest is called But Then I Came Back. It was originally, I called it These Mighty Forces, but the publishing house felt that it sounded like a military drama, which I could kind of see. And so they decided to call it But Then I Came Back, because it's about a girl who comes out of an accident and has to rebuild her life. And because she spends little time kind of dabbling in the afterlife, what she comes back to is a very shaky reality. And she, the sort of subplot that kind of takes you through is that she meets a girl in the afterlife who she then discovers is in the hospital with her when she comes out of her accident. And so she kind of has to figure out why they met, what the girl was trying to tell her, and also come to grips, sort of, I think one of the big questions that we all have, depending on our faith, is there an afterlife? What happens when we die? And so for me, I really wanted to look at what happens if you know there's something after, and it's pretty good. Like, then what do you do? I am in awe of all the time of people who are like do short stories and they've got hundreds of characters. And if you read their books, like Alice Munro is someone I really like to read. I am just blown away because her characters are fully three-dimensional. She knows their whole lives and their whole backstory, and she's got hundreds of short stories. And for me, like this little world that I built in Cherryville with these, like, say, 8 characters that I know everything about, that took forever. And so I have a hard time just dropping them and moving on to something else. I want to get as much out of them as I possibly can because it's really hard for me. That's not something that comes natural to me as a writer. I have to really piece things together. There's a little bit of Taos. There's certainly a little bit of my experience of what it was like to be a young person in Taos. I so far have not made Taos my location, and someone just asked me about that the other day, and I explained to them that I think Taos is a very complex social structure. I think if you're going to write about Taos, that Taos has to be as much of a character as any of the characters, because you've got 3 very different, racial kind of cultures happening in the same place. You've got the way that it's changed from an agrarian to a tourist kind of society, and you've got the way all the kids kind of mesh together and function together. And I just think it's a brave thing. Like, I think what John Nichols has done is brave, writing the Milagro Beanfield War and stuff. But he did it right because he made that the central focus and issue. And I don't know how I would write a book about teenagers being here without making that a really big part of it. And so far, I haven't figured out how to do that. I hope someday I'll be able to, like a story will come that will make all of that happen. But I think so far it's easier to set it in New Jersey. So I'm working on something right now that is going to be more magical realism. I really like that because I think it's interesting to normalize magic in a way. Like the Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the man with the very enormous wings, about the angel who kind of lands in someone's backyard. I love that. Everything is real except for the fact that this guy's got wings. And so I'm trying to write something like that. And we'll see what happens. We're going to see. I don't have a contract for it yet. I'm just kind of going out there and see how people respond to it. Give it a go. Last time I was a little too shy to have like an opening, but this time Opposite very kindly invited me. So I will be, the book comes out April 4th, and I will be at Opposite April 8th at 2 to 3:30. And I'll do a little reading and answer some questions, sign some books, and my very talented baker friend is going to bring some baked goods. So I hope everyone will come and show support for Opposite and for But Then I Came Back.
Thank you very much for sitting down with us.
Thank you, Rick.